Good day. This is Shad with West Coast Styles. I have a very special interview for everyone. As you all know, West Coast Styles is a music and culture site. Therefore, an integral part of it is how we ourselves document all of that for our loyal viewership. And that importance, of course, extends beyond just West Coast Styles and applies to anyone who picks up a pen, sits at a keyboard, or grabs a camera to record events as they unfold. One person who knows about this more than most is the gentleman I have with me via Zoom, Mr. Brian Karem. Brian is a 40-year veteran of the journalism business who has done it all from local.
I'm old.
He is a 40-year veteran of the journalism business who has done it all from local news to war coverage to immigration issues to working for America's Most Wanted to serving as the senior White House correspondent for Playboy and everything in between. This man truly has a wealth of experience, and that is a testament to his talents. The passion he has for his work is even further demonstrated in his ability to ask hard questions and press those in power, even if doing so puts his career at risk. However, his efforts have not gone unnoticed, and he has been the recipient of both the National Press Club Freedom of the Press Award and the Pieringer Award for Valor and Journalist Excellence. His new book, Free the Press, The Death of American Journalism and How to Revive It, which is available now, serves as part memoir and part dissection of journalism in this country and includes 3 steps to save the press from its current state. With everyone seemingly more divided than ever now and claims of fake news and bias running rampant, this book couldn't be timelier. It is my pleasure and privilege to be speaking with Mr. Brian Karem. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to speak with me, sir.
Sure, glad to do it, man. Glad to help. How can I help?
You have a very storied career spanning decades in the journalism business. Why did you choose to write a book about your experiences now?
Well, they offered me a lot of money. No, the reason, the simple reason is this. I've heard people for years say there's problems with the press, and there are, but you listen to people on the left, they say we tilt to the right. You listen to people on the right, they say we tilt to the left. There's a liberal bias, there's a conservative bias. Look, there's none of that. And what I wanted to do was to point to what the real problems are and continue to be in this business, and in hopes of maybe fixing them. But to fix them, you have to acknowledge, acknowledging the problem is the first step. And we've never come to grips with what the problem is in the press. And that's, boils down to the last 40 years, the government has systematically destroyed free speech. We're not biased to the left. We're not biased to the right. We're biased towards money. Wherever we can, sell what we're selling. Journalism has become tethered to capitalism, and I'm a great believer in capitalists. Go out and buy as many copies as my book as you can. I believe in it, but you can't tether journalism to capitalism, because what happens when you do that is that we end up producing stuff that you want to read and see and hear rather than what you need to see, read, or hear. Sometimes what you need to know about is not what you want to know about, but you need it. And we have spent way too much time in the last 40 years becoming infotainment instead of journalists. So it was Donald Trump and covering that White House that led me to that. I didn't want to write another Donald Trump, expose or Donald Trump book. He gets plenty of oxygen. I want to enlighten people as to what the problems are in press from working in it for 40 years and saying, look, man, you want to see real news again, here's how you do it.
I liked how your book illustrated how Trump is more so just a symptom of all of this as opposed to just the core problem.
Yeah, everybody thinks he's the cause, and he's not. He's not the cause. He's a symptom. The cause began with Richard Nixon and his racist Southern policy, his Southern strategy to get reelected and appealing to people that he knew he could con. And from there, it went to Ronald Reagan. And every president since Ronald Reagan has helped further the disillusion or the dissolving of our First Amendment rights.
Yeah, because with Reagan, and we'll get to this in a second, because I'm very curious on your thoughts on this, is the whole fairness doctrine, but also because Clinton had the Telecommunications Act, And then President Obama used the Espionage Act, correct?
Yeah. And then the Bushes were involved in, the wonderful Patriot Act and some of
Mhm.
that, everything that every president has done, starting with getting rid of the fairness doctrine and allowing the consolidation of media has contributed to the demise of the free press. There are twice the number of people on this planet today as on the day that I was born, half the number in the United States, half the number of reporters. That's a problem. That's a huge problem.
Mhm. Speaking of free speech, now you've been to jail a couple of times for protecting a confidential source. Is that correct?
Four
Four
times.
times?
Sorry, 4 times for the same story. It was a murder in San Antonio, Texas, and a cop got murdered halfway through his overnight shift in the northeast side of San Antonio, considered the good part of town. And 2 Hispanic brothers were suspects, and there was talk of extracting street justice and killing these kids. And they turned themselves in so they wouldn't be murdered. And then they confessed, one of them confessed to me that he did pull the trigger, but he did it in self-defense and said the cop was acting strangely at the time, and nobody believed him. And then, of course, when the autopsy came back and we found out that the police officer had been speedballing, taking heroin and cocaine, there was enough heroin and cocaine in his systems after 4 or 5 blood transfusion. It was in his bones. So he was pretty well lit the night he stopped these kids, and they were lucky to get away with their lives, and the cop was not so lucky. That was a huge story, and it was very indicative of there were racist tones to it. There was they were 2 Hispanic brothers. What were they doing on that side of the town? Was the saying at the time. We're going to extract street justice. Who are cops to do that? And then no one wanted to believe that these kids were innocent, or that there were extenuating circumstances to what had occurred. So it was an important story, and I think that one that resonates today still.
Now, from my perspective, Reagan getting rid of the fairness doctrine is one of the main reasons there's such a divide in politics and news coverage today. Is that a fair and accurate assessment?
As far as I'm concerned, it's dead on, balls on accurate. Yeah. The fairness doctrine gave us a lot of stuff on television that we needed. It gave us the news hour. It gave us news, and more over public service programming came into its own. Without the fairness doctrine, we live in informational silos today. So we don't ever really listen to what the other side says, because we don't have to be fair. Which is why you have Fox News, which is why you have OAN, which is why you have all of them. Fairness doctrine forces us all back. It's a guardrail to ensure that both sides are heard and both sides are evaluated fairly.
Most definitely. That speaks very much to just with current technology and stuff. That documentary, I don't know if you've seen it, The Social Dilemma, and it addresses that issue specifically on just how people are just kind of in their own silos of information. And what's almost equally frustrating, with whatever side someone may lean, is it's not so much that this did or didn't happen, is that they legitimately don't know, just because they're not being exposed to all the information.
Exactly. And that's one of the biggest problems today. You're not exposed to anything outside of your own informational silo.
Mhm. You've courageously stood up to and pressed presidents and their press secretaries at times with tough questions. Did you ever have a fear of doing that? And if so, how did you overcome it?
Nah, I never had a fear for it. As I said in the book, first president I ever met was John Kennedy when I was an infant, and I peed all over him. And as my dad said, I was pissing on politicians ever since. I grew up in a political family, and a writing family. I was an early admirer of H.L. Menken and John Reed. And so those journalists guided my early understanding what journalism is. And, we're there to hold people's feet to the fire, to make them accountable. And I have I've been accused of being rude, reckless, whatever. I don't care. I don't give a shit. I'm there. I'm going to ask my questions, answer them, don't answer them. I'm not going to stop because you think I should get a twitch in my britches because you're a politician. As far as I'm concerned, politicians work for us. They're not, and since they're our employees, by God, we ought to be able to find out what it is they're doing.
That sounds completely fair and reasonable. I really like that.
What a concept. Fair and reasonable.
Yeah.
Details at 11.
I really like that part in the book too, where you talk about that H.L. Menken quote that you had at your office that your boss saw, and how referring to being the buster of balloons.
Yeah. He was a good burster of balloons at a time.
Burster of balloons.
Needed to be burst. That was what, that's what I was told by Barry Bingham Sr., who was the owner of the newspaper I worked for. The thing that amazed me about that is I was absolutely the lowest guy on the totem pole in that newsroom. I mean, I was a dedicated stringer at covering weekly news at the Courier Journal and Louisville Times. And I had this desk that I shared with others. And above my desk, I had that saying from H.L. Mencken that it was a saying from H.L. Mencken about, nothing easier than to fool a reporter, and how, we need to dedicate ourselves to doing the job right, et cetera, so on. And I was just amazed that Barry even saw it. And then, he called me into his office, and I thought I was getting canned. I thought for sure that was the last day I'd work at the Courier. And it turns out he just liked that saying. And I said, he hadn't really run the papers at that point for a dozen years. His son was running it. He still had an office he came to every day, but his son was running the papers. And so I said, how did you even see that? And he goes, nothing happens at my newspapers that I don't know about. So that told you who the real power still was at those newspapers.
Speaking of that, and just kind of independence and news at a community level, one of the big takeaways from your book that I got was the significance of local news coverage, and just that even national stories have to start at a local level. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Well, that's I maintain, look, this book, I talk about busting up media monopolies, and that is probably the most controversial thing there and the toughest thing to do, using existing legislation that we have, antitrust legislation, to bust up large media monopolies. Then I talk about reinstituting the fairness doctrine. The third thing I talk about is making sure there's a national shield law so reporters can protect confidential sources without having to go to jail like I did. But the easiest thing to do, and the thing that has to be done first, is you build journalism from the ground up. You need to support community newspapers. There are thousands of communities across this country that no longer have a community newspaper. They're still viable. Newspapers will remain viable. The written word, the typed word, the printed word is viable. The ads, the public service ads that would tell about, sales, like estate sales, or let you know when governments were meeting, city councils were meeting, et cetera. All those things are necessary, and they bind a community together. You and I may not agree on politics at a national level, who we want, but you and I both want to have our streets paved, fresh water in our home, electricity, schools, the basics. And that's, and by God, everybody has a friend or a family member or somebody that played on a high school football team or soccer or whatever. And so all those or the swim team, or you go to the swim club, or all these meetings that these small newspapers cover are important to build a community. And we don't have them anymore. We have vast informational news deserts in this country. And because of it, the only time we interact with our neighbors sometimes is to get pissed off at them because one's a Republican, one's a Democrat, one carries a gun and one doesn't. Well, we shouldn't be shooting and beating the hell out of each other when we're all have far more in common than we have different from one another. And we need a diversity of ownership, a diversity of newspapers, a diversity of coverage, so that people's voices can be heard. So I think that the best way to do that is to give, like incentives, tax breaks, and low interest loans. And here's an idea, on your income tax, if you can prove that you've subscribed to a newspaper, you get $100 rebate on your income taxes. I mean, all of those things are necessary. Government support for journalism has to exist, or journalism won't exist. And when
Mm,
journalism doesn't exist, fascism does.
mhm. In 2018, Reporters Without Borders added the United States to the list of most dangerous countries for journalists. Were you surprised by that, or was that something you saw coming based on the direction journalism in this country had been headed?
It's been headed that way for a while. We were entered in a, not most dangerous, but I think troubled. We
Oh,
were a
troubled.
troubled
Okay.
democracy. And so that's right on the borderline. And that, here's the country that invented free speech in the First Amendment. And we're not first in the world in supporting it. What
Yeah.
kind of crap is that? It's been coming for a while. But the idea that in the land of the free and the home of the brave, we're not free and we're not very brave, it should frighten everyone and make everyone have, take a moment and think about that.
What inspired you to start your podcast, Just Ask the Question?
Helen Thomas. Helen Thomas was one of my first mentors. She was the first woman I met when I walked in the White House briefing room in 1986, and she gave me the advice. She said, "Don't be afraid to ask a question." She said, "Whatever it is, just ask the question. You may not get an answer. You may get an answer. You may not get the answer you want, but no one could deny that the question has been asked, that the issue has been raised. And that's what we're there to do, is to raise issues and ask questions." So as I got more into, covering that type of stuff, I thought the best thing to do was take what Helen said and put it to use.
Mhm. Having just surpassed the 1 year mark of the events of January 6th, 2021, I'd be remiss not to ask, what was that experience like being there?
It angers me. That was an insurrection. That was an attempt to overthrow an election. That was an attempt to kill elected officials. During the Civil War, the Confederate flag did not once fly in the Capitol, but the January 6th insurrection, it did. These people were racist. These people were dangerous. They were treasonous. They were traitors. There's no other way to put it. I've covered wars. I've covered riots in Baltimore, St. Louis, across the globe, covered riots down in Bogota, Colombia. Look, man, I was never more afraid for my life than I was that day in the citadel of democracy. What does that say? That
It's
I watched
terrifying.
Americans kill and maim and hurt and threaten other Americans. A friend of mine got sucker punched in the back of the head because he was a reporter. I had 5 or 6 of them rush me and threaten to kick my ass, and they didn't. But it was a bad day for democracy. It was horrible. And my feeling is that everyone involved from top to bottom should be investigated, indicted, and prosecuted. And every member of Congress and the Senate who was involved should be expelled. And they should not allow people who are not going to uphold the tenets of our democracy and the Constitution. They should not be allowed to represent us. End of story. That was a scary, frightening, terrifying, horrifying day in the history of the United States. It wasn't a bunch of people that showed up to peacefully protest. Okay. They weren't. There were some NFL weekend warrior types, the kind who rip their shirt off and paint their face. And,
Mhm.
but they all got caught up in the violence that the other people came there to perpetrate. And in the end, I watched them put up that scaffold. They would have hung Mike Pence that day if they had gotten a hold of him. If they had gotten a hold of Nancy Pelosi, they would have killed her. These people were deadly. They were wrong-headed, and they were angry. And they were whipped into a frenzy by the president of the United States when he and Rudy Giuliani came out and said trial by combat. And one of the two interchangeable sons of his that, are moron one and moron two came out and egged them on. By the time they started marching towards the Capitol, they were ready to fight. And they were put in that mood and that mindset by the president. He should be prosecuted for it. He should never see the light of day again. And I'm sorry if you don't like it, tough shit. That's a straight story. That guy is a traitor to the American ideals that we all should subscribe to as written in our Constitution. Screw him and a horse he rode in on.
I agree 100%. And I do. And I think even excuse me, a precursor to that, one of the things that caught my attention was a few months before that, when you asked Trump about the peaceful transition of power, and he said, stop counting the ballots.
Yeah. You want to know where the insurrection started on that day, September 23rd. And that was before the election even occurred. He was saying that the ballots were fraudulent, and he was setting up his story then. The ballots hadn't even been cast. How do you know anything was fraudulent?
Mhm.
He said, there's problems with the ballots. You know it. I know it. I go, no, I don't know it. I wasn't playing that game with him. And then he said, well, stop counting the ballots and there won't be a transfer. That's what he wanted.
Mhm.
And he told us on that day.
And you even said win, lose, or draw. You were it was a very objective question. And
Yeah.
even he took that and twisted it.
Yeah, because he knew he was going to lose.
Your book, and I don't want to give too much of the book away, so I'll word this next question carefully. Your book concludes with kind of a 3-step plan to save the press, and you alluded to that a little bit earlier as well.
Yeah.
How long did it take for you to develop that, and was that something that you had in the works for a while, or did you develop it specifically for the book?
Well, it's 40 years of working in the business that led me to that conclusion. I mean, that's 40 years of research. I just watched my business fall apart. And look, we're always going to have, the internet is such, we're not going to get rid of bloggers. We're not going to, podcasts are proliferating. All that's good. I think the more voices we have, the better. But I think there are some things we should dedicate ourselves to.
Mhm.
And some of those things that we should dedicate ourselves to, the book points to those. If you really want to be a journalist and not just some guy shooting your mouth off, here are the steps to follow to do that. And I make those available to people who want to know how to, conduct business as a journalist and not just as someone offering their opinion. Because you can offer your opinion, that doesn't make you a journalist.
Mhm.
I've had reporters that work for me come up to me and say, this is what I think. And I go, I don't give a shit what you think. I barely care what I think. What do you know? What can you vet? What are facts? I want to know the facts. And I want everyone to get the same facts so then they can make a decision for their lives. Now, you may not agree with one another about your opinions based on the facts, but we should at least agree on what the facts are. And
Mhm.
journalism is a method to do that. Politics used to be a method by which we worked out our differences in rowing together in the same direction instead of dividing each other. And I want to kill you and you want to kill me. That's not politics. That's insurrection. Politics is the language by which we solve our problems and find common ground. And you can't find that without clear communication, and that's journalism.
You've said before that you collect old newspapers and stories. Are there any specific headlines or articles that stand out to you, or that you'd ever refer back to for inspiration or motivation or anything?
Well, the readings of John Reed, H.L. Mencken, Hunter Thompson, all of them, I always go back to, but I have a collection of about 100 newspapers, and the New York Observer from the Lincoln assassination stands out to me. I read that and I'm just fascinated by how much information was available the day after his assassination and how in depth it is and how it brings history alive to me in a way that history books cannot and do not. It's not cut and dry. It's raw, and I recommend everybody read something like that. Then the Titanic. I got a series of newspapers that start out with Titanic hits iceberg, everybody's safe, and then the fourth or fifth one down is Titanic hits iceberg, 1,400 dead. You can see the progression from what happens, in the beginning, and that's today it would be called fake news, but it isn't. News is what you know at your deadline time that you can verify and print. And in the beginning, all you could verify and print was, it hit an iceberg, because that was what came out on the wireless. And at the beginning, obviously people were safe because someone transmitted the fact that they hit an iceberg.
Mhm.
And as the information became available later and more people were interviewed and the survivors showed up, you got more of the story and it got more rounded. And today we have such a short news cycle that people are upset if you don't know everything at the exact moment it happens. And that's not possible. I don't care who you are.
Mhm.
So I love having those newspapers around because they remind me of what news is. It's the first take on history, not the last. So I keep them around to remind me of better reporting.
Mhm. You said that Hunter S. Thompson was an influence of yours. That must have been really cool to be associated with Playboy.
Well, I liked Hunter way before that. Him and my dad, grew up together. So I mean,
Oh, really? Did you
yeah.
know him?
I met Hunter once, and no, I did not know him well. I the family rumor was that my great uncle, who was a lawyer in Louisville, got him out of a robbing a gas charge. He would rob the gas station or a liquor store or something, and he got him in the Air Force instead of jail. And from there, Hunter began his writing career. But he was a Kentucky boy, and I had followed his work since I was in Louisville boy. And I have relatives who live like two doors down from where he grew up, and to this day, I still read and enjoy Hunter Thompson. I
Wonderful.
have not taken as many drugs as as he took, but I still enjoy some of his stuff.
No, sometimes it takes that. Yeah, people got to get in that creative space, and sometimes to each his own. I say that's not really my cup of tea either. But again, okay, like well,
Well,
you know, I cover hip hop, so obviously there are a lot of people experiment with a lot of substances and and
hey, have
not
fun with them.
all-
They all should be legal. Make them all legal and treat it as a social problem as it is, and take away the violence and the excessive money, and you might actually kill the drug cartels that way.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting as well, how you brought up just because it's something I've believed for a long time is that the war on drugs was a joke.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the drugs won.
Yeah.
So, look, we always scream about illegal immigration and we scream about the problems in South and Central America. We created them.
Mhm.
Okay. Our government created most of the problems in South and Central America. And the American public created them because there is a look, you want to talk about capitalism. The most ferocious capitalists I know are drug dealers.
Uh-huh.
There's a law of supply and a law of demand. We have a demand for the drugs, and the drug dealers, well, they'll supply it. There's money to be made, they're going to do it. If you want to take the profit out of it and the violence out of it and actually solve the problem, you would simply legalize all drugs and help out addicts. Why is it okay to drink alcohol but not okay to smoke weed? We're finally coming around to the idea that you can smoke weed, but it's like everybody who grew up in my generation. Hell, I barely know anybody who didn't get high.
Uh-huh.
you know, it was Bill Clinton who said he didn't inhale. Shit, I know people. I'm pretty sure they never exhaled. They're still high today. So legalize it and take the danger out of it and treat it as it's not a moral issue. God doesn't want us to take drugs. Well, I don't think God cares. He put marijuana on the planet, gave us the brains to create the drugs. It's up to us. We
Yeah.
do what we want. That's the joy of that. So don't do drugs if you don't want to do drugs. That just say no to drugs thing that the Reagans promoted is the biggest cock and bull story ever. It's all, and that was one thing Edward R. Murrow warned about in 1958, and that's in this book. If we don't get better information, we're going to be a slave to slogans and propaganda, and that's what we are. I don't want, Buzz a socialist. You don't even have a clue what a socialist is. Shut the hell up. I don't need the vaccine. I take Ivermectin and I drink my own urine and take Clorox. Well, screw you. You're an idiot. And we've lost a lot of trust in our institutions. And part of it is because we don't trust the press to tell us the truth. So therefore we don't trust it. And politicians have done most of the footwork in destroying trust. And, it's like going to tell Joe Rogan, stay in your lane, pal. do bad comedy and let the science, when it comes to science, I want to trust the scientist.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, but if I want to know a good punchline to a joke, maybe I'll call Joe Rogan, but I don't want to know what he has to say. I don't really give a shit what he has to say about the pandemic. The scientists tell me to get facts. I trust them.
Mhm.
And that would be nice if we started, trusting people again. But that again goes back to your initial question and goes back to one of the premises of the book is that, we have to clean up the press.
Well, thank you so much for your time, sir. I really, really appreciate it. It's been an honor.
The honor has been mine.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that. Again, I sincerely think this is a book that everybody needs to read. It's something that
Well,
I
so
think-
do I. That's why I wrote it.
Yeah.
It's
Sounds
called Free
good.
the Press. You can get it anywhere where books are sold. You can order it online. And if I run into you, I'll be happy to autograph a copy.
Sounds good. Well, thanks again for your time, sir, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Anytime.
Yep. Have a wonderful evening.
You too, brother. Be safe.
You too. Peace.
What time is it? Okay, we have some fabulous live music later on, but right now, here's the kind I prefer.